You're listening to the Next Level Construction Management Podcast, celebrating unapologetic greatness, proudly promoting meritocracy, and daring to be different by design. Here's your host, Rob Crum, ready to take your construction management performance to the next level.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Next Level Construction Management Podcast, taking your construction management performance to the next level. Man, I've been looking forward to this episode for a while now. Honestly, I could probably do 5 days in a row of at least 30-minute shows on this topic. But I'm going to do my best to squeeze the content down to a single episode. Before I get started though, I want to thank a good friend of mine that I worked with in Maryland. He called me late last week and just let me know that he was enjoying the podcast. He was sharing it with different people that he works with now. It just reminded me that the topics were definitely informative and just encouraged me to keep it up. Anyways, he knows who he is. I don't know if I thanked him during the call, but it meant a lot to me, and honestly, I really needed it. The timing couldn't have been better. So, thanks. And to all of you that followed the show last week, thank you as well. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal now, especially when, some shows have hundreds of thousands, millions of followers. Going from 6 to 12 followers in a week is something to me. It's kind of like that, how do you eat an elephant philosophy, I guess. Next goal is to get 20 followers before my next episode, and I'll just keep pushing forward from there. Alright, I'm going to rip the band-aid off right now and say something that may piss some people off, but thankfully I didn't take my I give a fuck pill today, so here it is. Sense of urgency is bullshit. There you go. Probably going to be a few expletives today, so if that's not your thing, feel free to tune out now, but this topic has become extremely personal to me, and I'm going to be talking very honestly. With that, there may be some adult language. Let me reiterate this. Sense of urgency is bullshit and is yet another example of the law of counterintuitiveness. I'm going to explain why this is the case on multiple levels and with very simple, common sense examples. Next. Alright. I obviously just made what some could consider a blasphemous statement, so let me start to explain why I take this position. But before we get started, let me say this. Almost everything I discuss can either be looked at as either right or wrong. Ultimately, it's going to come down to your perspective and what your goal is. Now, I've been crystal clear on my goal, to build it correctly the first time, period. With that goal in mind, everything I'm getting ready to say about sense of urgency being bullshit is damn near 100% inarguable. But if your goal is to take this, the customer is always right, you have to keep the client happy at all times approach, then a strong argument can be made to operate under this sense of urgency philosophy. But I'll be blunt here too. I do not go into a project with the goal at all of making the customer or client happy. I obviously am not trying to intentionally piss them off, and I'd rather them be happy, but I am not going to divert from my approach or process just because someone, somewhere along the way, gets upset. Because here's what I've learned after almost 10 years of implementing these next level processes. On projects that I manage almost exclusively to these principles, by the end of the project, I have had only one person remain unhappy with me. There have been many times, and I always jokingly warn new architects I work with, that there's a chance that they might not like me for the first third to half of the job. But usually by about that halfway point, when problems that normally start arising one after another, when constructability issues start coming to the surface, when the drawings don't match what the owner and tenant vendors are trying to do, when none of these problems are occurring, they start to realize that I truly was just trying to ensure that the project was built correctly and without all these oh shits they become accustomed to. So I've come to understand and candidly expect that I may not be liked during the entire project. But as I've said on a prior episode, I'll take my thanks at the end. And along with this, let me say outright that if given the choice, I'd rather be right than first. I saw a clip of Andrew Tate recently where he said something to the effect of, if you deliver your product at about the same cost as your competition and at about the same quality as your competition, but you're able to respond faster to your customers, then you will always win the work. And given those parameters, I couldn't agree more with what he's saying. Because what he's saying is that timeliness then is what differentiates you from your competition. But if you've watched my prior episodes, it's pretty clear that my differentiators are my process level approach, which allows me to identify problems well in advance of them becoming problems, and having the work ethic required to accomplish this approach. I think it's much more valuable to take time to do less more correctly, as opposed to taking less time to do more less correctly. Think about this. It's very important. I'm going to say it again. Take more time to do less more correctly, instead of take less time to do more less correctly. I've worked with and managed a lot of project engineers and project managers. And let me tell you the most consistent thing I hear. When simple attention to detail errors are made, I'm sorry, I was just being too thorough, not multitasking enough, and I checked it way too many times before I sent it in. And of course I'm being an asshole, because obviously I have never heard this before, and it's almost the complete opposite statement. I'm sorry, I was just rushing, trying to do too much at once, and just didn't double check it before I sent it in. Another way to look at it, my process-based approach is purpose-driven, not perception-driven. So let's look at this in terms of an obstacle course. So let's say that this obstacle course has that tire run, where you run inside 2 rows of tires, and for every one you miss, 3-second penalty. Next, you got a wire crawl, and every time your back touches the wire, 1-second penalty. All right, then you got some monkey bars, and if you fall off before you finish, 5-second penalty, followed by a balance beam where again, 1-second penalty for each time you step off, and finally a 4, 6, and 8 foot wall climb with a 2, 4, and 6-second penalty for not getting over respectively. Now, imagine we're racing and you beat me by 11 seconds. You get done 1 minute, 53 seconds. I sloshed to the finish line in an abysmal 2 minutes and 4 seconds. The perception is that you smoked me, right? Looking at this situation in a vacuum, you did. But let's look at it in the aggregate. Let's go beyond the typical perception is reality. So I completed it with only 1 penalty on the wire crawl and 1 penalty on the balance beam. So my final adjusted time is 2 minutes and 6 seconds. How'd you do? Well, you missed 2 tires. There's 6 seconds. Same single wire crawl infraction, another second. Ooh, ouch. You fell off the monkey bars, huh? Well, there's 5 more seconds. 3 times off the balance beam. Come on, man. You got to step up your game. The balance beam, there's another 3 seconds. And you completely skipped the 8-foot wall for a 6-second penalty. So after adding your 21 seconds of penalties, your adjusted time is 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Wait, so perception isn't reality? And speed doesn't always beat accuracy? When I say I'd rather be right than first, this is what I'm talking about. Okay, coming out of the gate hot today. I think sense of urgency is bullshit, and I don't care if the client is happy. I better have a damn airtight argument to have such bold positions. Let's find out. But first, let's start by defining the term. Now here's a screenshot of my phone when I just typed in, what is sense of urgency? A sense of urgency is a feeling or understanding. Wait, let's just stop here. Did that just say a feeling? This is where I like to implement the say it out loud test. Here goes. I'm supposed to be basing my professional decisions, how I earn a living, how I provide for and feed my family, on feelings? This is the approach my kids take. It's getting late, and they're in the backyard playing, so I tell them to come inside and start getting ready for bed. And they start throwing a tantrum and yelling. Their behavior is a direct reflection of their feelings. Their feelings are dictating their decisions. I mean, you got to do better than my 4-year-olds. Isn't one of the key components of gaining maturity, usually somewhere in your teen years, reacting less to feelings and emotion and more to logic and reason? But now, I am to believe that I'm doing myself a professional disservice if I don't revert to the behavior of my kids in preteens. I'm sorry, but this is a stupid pill I cannot swallow. Okay, Let's just pause here, get the corporate disclaimer out of the way. The opinions expressed on this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not represent those of any current or former employers. Okay, now that you've had a moment to consider the utter absurdity of managing based on feelings, let's move on to the rest of the definition, starting at the top. A sense of urgency is a feeling or understanding that specific tasks and projects are urgent. They require immediate attention and completion. All right, let's look at the second part. A sense of urgency is understanding that specific tasks and projects are urgent. So urgency is understanding something is urgent. Is this a fucking joke? We're defining the word with the word. How can I even start to take this topic seriously with this as my starting point? Define a car, Rob. Well, a car is something that looks like a car and functions like a car. I mean, is this really what we're doing here? All right, I'm just moving past this. Last part of the definition. Sense of urgency is an understanding that tasks and projects require immediate attention and completion. Now this part, at face value, I'm not going to argue with too much. But my only question would be, who or how are we determining that the task or project needs immediate attention and completion? Let's hold on this third component for a minute. Here's the next part of sense of urgency that I have a problem with at a very basic level. Because as we've just discussed, it's a feelings-based approach. Well, this leaves two big problems for me. First, feelings are subjective. And second, everyone on the project, the architect, the engineer, the client, the GC, the subs, have a different perspective. So feelings of what is urgent will vary from one entity to the next. And honestly, it can vary from one individual to the next within these groups. Do I expect the GC's project manager to have the same idea of urgent as the superintendent or the project executive or the vice president of the division? And this is not a bad thing and should be expected because each of them, because of their unique perspective, their roles and responsibilities, the level to which they're involved in the project, will have a different idea of what they feel is urgent. And this is where we tie back into the third component of that definition, to the part where I said I didn't have an issue at face value. Well, we're getting beyond face value now. And here is where even that component of the definition unravels. Because the obvious next question is, whose perspective are we going to follow to determine something is urgent, that the task requires immediate attention and completion? This is such a loaded question. Let me just start here. First, at any moment, how are you even going to know what everyone feels is urgent? You're not. So just based on that statement, trying to operate with this sense of urgency will always leave someone feeling like you didn't operate with a sense of urgency. Now, let's just assume for shits and giggles that for a particular situation or moment, you were able to determine what everyone felt was urgent. Now, for the sake of us having a reasonable conversation here, we of course know that not everyone will agree in unanimity on what is urgent, which leads to only one outcome. No matter what or whose urgency you decide to follow, again, someone, and probably most people, will feel like you didn't act with a sense of urgency. So the entire concept is literally set up for you to fail. This gets us back to the subjective problem with this approach. If I know what everyone thinks is urgent, and as the PM of the project, I am ultimately responsible for making the decision on what to do next, how am I going to do that? Well, this is the part of the show where it's only fair to me to provide what the counter approach is. I never want to be one of these guys that's just ranting on about things I have issues with and pointing out problems without providing you with the counter position and solution. It's like after an all-star team is announced and the pundits get on TV talking about this guy was snubbed and that guy was snubbed. But every once in a while, someone else on the show will look at them and say, okay, well, who are you going to take off the team to get those players on? Who are you taking off? And the person complaining is unwilling to name a single player who shouldn't have made the team. So basically, no matter what, they're just going to complain and never provide a solution. So how am I going to make the decision on what to do next? Because as a practical statement, this is going to indicate what I felt was urgent, what I determined required immediate attention and completion. Well, evaluating all of the options, opposing points of view, and feelings of what everyone thinks is urgent will allow me to operate not with a sense of urgency, but rather a sense of awareness. I'll look at the different options objectively and determine what needs immediate attention. I'll make this decision based on criticalness, based on logic and reasoning, not on feelings and emotion. Objective, not subjective decision making. Okay, so we can take the definition of sense of urgency, place that next to the toilet, and give it a more useful purpose for the next time nature calls. And likewise, we can take the practical application of implementing this, knowing that it's literally setting you up for failure on multiple levels. Flush that argument down the toilet too. Next, let's look at the famous time management matrix. And for the sake of this discussion, let's forget how I've just eviscerated the very definition and practical application of urgency and look at this as a standalone argument for following this sense of urgency. Now, there's only two boxes that have urgent in them. Box 1, urgent, important. And box 3, urgent, not important. Box 3 is sometimes called the delegate or distraction box. Starting with box 1, urgent, important. Now, as we all know, this is the 911 emergency must take care of immediately box. These are the things that must be addressed immediately or they're going to become bigger problems. So yes, these are the urgent items that you need to address. No argument here. But my question is, how are you addressing them? Unfortunately, the typical way of addressing these items with a sense of urgency is to complete them at a procedural level in a rush to give them that perception of completion. I've already discussed the issues with this, so I'm not going to relitigate it. Rather, I'm going to recommend a different approach. How about instead of sense of urgency to act, or more accurately react, utilize a sense of urgency to acknowledge and notify. So with this, you'll notify the client of the issue, letting them know you're aware of it and working on getting it resolved. That you're putting a plan of action together, and you'll get back to them maybe in an hour, maybe at the end of the day, maybe in a day or two with your next steps and an update. Then, after that initial notification, take a more measured approach, determine with a little more perspective and accuracy what the issue is. Start formulating that plan, and then once you have all these things determined, follow up with the client with your next steps. I think in construction we call this measuring twice and cutting once. But even with this approach, I'll throw out a caution flag. You don't want to be crying wolf and notifying people about every little thing that happens. Early in my career, I moved to Phoenix, and I was with a great company, Westpac Construction. And I was given an example of front stage, backstage communication, and I think that applies here. Front stage is obviously the thing the spectators see, the beautifully orchestrated play in front of the curtain. And behind the curtain, well, that's the backstage where all the chaos is going on. You got actors trying to do quick costume and makeup changes, stagehands frantically preparing for the next set. Just a madhouse of activities, but not something you obviously want the spectators to see. Well, for our project, the spectators are going to be the client, the end user, architect, engineer. Backstage will primarily be the general contractor and subcontractors. And this is where crying wolf and letting those spectators know about every backstage activity or issue can be dangerous. But obviously, when something requires their knowledge, then acting with a sense of urgency to acknowledge and notify would be my recommended approach. So, weaving this all back together, ideally, as any training or education you've had on this matrix will tell you, you don't want to allow tasks to get to box 1, and your goal is to operate in box 2 as much as possible. Because box 2, those are items that are not urgent, but they are important. This is the box of proactivity. This is the box that will keep you ahead, prevent items from getting to box 1 and becoming emergencies. Now, obviously, there's things you can't predict. Things are going to end up in box 1 regardless of how good of a job you do in box 2. These are the things that are out of your control, regardless of your efforts. But you can greatly minimize and reduce the amount of items in box 1 by focusing the bulk of your attention on box 2 items and doing them correctly. Not doing them to do them, but doing them at the process level. So there's only 2 boxes when things are urgent. But the problem with sense of urgency guy is that they don't care which of these boxes the item's in. They don't differentiate between the two. They just see urgent and react. It's like with a cat, or actually humorously with my kids. I have a laser pointer in my bag. I'll use it on job site walks if I need to identify something on the ceiling. But sometimes, just because it's freaking hilarious, and my kids actually love it, I'll pull it out at home, and just like a cat does, my kids will chase that thing around the house, point it at the floor, and they dive at it. Point at a wall, and they're reaching for it. Over and over for as long as I do it. Point, react, repeat. Well, that's how sense of urgency guy does it. It doesn't matter if the urgent item is in box 1 or box 3. They just see and feel something is urgent, and just like my kids, they automatically react. As I mentioned earlier, do better than my 4-year-olds. So, Summarizing the dismantling of the time management matrix argument, box 1, urgent, important, are tasks that must be addressed immediately, but ultimately not a box you want to base your management philosophy out of. That only leaves box 3, urgent, not important. Again, not important. So clearly I'm not going to be basing my management philosophy out of this box either. So the only argument someone can make here is if they are putting items in box 1 that are actually box 3 tasks. And now we're back to deciding whose idea of urgent to follow, trying to determine what everyone considers urgent. And around we go. Grab your partner to do-si-do. So Morpheus, what do you think of the time management matrix?
The matrix is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
Yes, the matrix is pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. So clearly that dog, he won't hunt. What's next? All right, let's discuss this topic in relation to the CPM schedule. Now, I didn't go to one of these fancy colleges and get a construction management degree. And although Slippery Rock University is known as the Harvard of Butler County, Pennsylvania, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong. Because obviously this was meant to be the UPM schedule, right? I mean, come on. Someone clearly had a few too many vodka sandwiches during lunch and turned the U on its side, and it's just never been corrected. It's the urgency path method, right? Wait, that didn't happen? The C is actually a C? Oh, it's the critical path method. Okay? Well, in that case, let's go ahead and tie back to our objective logic-based approach, sense of awareness approach to the critical path method scheduling. As we've discussed, when you have a laundry list of different perspectives on what is urgent and a list of tasks that need to be addressed, the correct approach is going to be to develop a sense of awareness and to objectively look at the tasks and determine what should be focused on next. Well, a very helpful tool to use to determine what should be focused on next is the CPM schedule. I mean, if I have a submittal on my desk that I need to review and get to the architect for final approval to get that material ordered, and I know that because of the material lead time, that ordering it is on the critical path of the schedule, but I had a call from someone and they feel like something else is urgent and they want me to focus on that instead. Well, as we've previously discussed, time is the most valuable resource we have, and I can only work on one of these tasks at that moment. What do? Do I dare risk being labeled as someone who lacks a sense of urgency? Or do I risk the completion date of the project by delaying the submittal review? Well, the answer to this is pretty obvious to me. You politely and professionally delay that person's request and focus on the submittal. With one caveat. If you're able to adjust the logic of the schedule, of the tasks, their sequencing, overlaps, whatever, and move that material off the critical path and allow yourself the time to do both, then by all means, take care of the request and then come back to the submittal. But that caveat, that statement, literally proves my point, not yours. And that's because the CPM schedule is based on objective logic. You have to put thought into approaching tasks differently before the critical task items are changed. You didn't just say, well, I don't really feel that material is critical to meeting my end date, so yeah, I guess I can wait a couple days. So sure, I can take care of a couple other tasks first. And I'm not talking about adjusting the schedule to make it what I like to call a six-legged dog schedule. Just because you can draw a six-legged dog doesn't mean I can go down to the pound and find one. And just because I can adjust the logic of the schedule to say I can paint walls before I hang drywall doesn't mean I can actually do it. I'm talking about making legitimate, realistic adjustments to work around a potential issue and find a way to meet the completion date without letting that material delay you. Maybe the material was to be installed in a room or an early phase of the project, but by moving that room or phase to later on in the project, you've allowed yourself additional time before it's needed to be approved and released. But you didn't do this with hopes and dreams. You did it intentionally and deliberately with objective reasoning and thought. So your decision-making ends up in alignment with logic-based criticalness rather than emotion-based urgency. Sounds like the CPM schedule favors the sense of awareness team, chalking up wins like the 96 Bulls. Okay, man, I seriously have like 3 pages more of notes here. So obviously I'm not getting to everything today. So this topic clearly just became a 2-episode topic, but let me finish with this. Let's discuss the treat everything as urgent approach. I'll start by saying this. If everything is urgent, then nothing is urgent. You need darkness to have light and vice versa. We only know what rude behavior is because we know what kind behavior is. Wait, didn't I say something like this before? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And besides that obvious logical issue, let's look at it from a practical standpoint. If you're telling me that everything is to be treated as urgent, and let's say I have 100 tasks to do, you obviously believe then, and this isn't exaggerating for effect, that position literally then would support me writing each of these 100 tasks down on a piece of paper, folding each paper up, putting them in a bucket, and just drawing one out at random for completion. That's what that approach is telling me is acceptable at a practical level. That is utterly fucking ridiculous. This is the equivalent of completely managing in a vacuum, not taking any consideration of how choosing to complete any tasks affects the overall workload. So I'm just going to play a game of task whack-a-mole. Whatever pops up, just whack it with no regard for focusing or hitting. That item will cause to miss the next item. And maybe that next item actually is more critical. Nope, just whacking away at it. Whack, whack, whacking hard, whacking, just whacking. All right, enough with the whacking. Can you imagine a nurse, let's say a triage nurse, taking this approach, treating every injury as an urgent injury? Well, okay, Mr. Jones, I see you're having a massive heart attack there, but if you just sit in the waiting area while we address a couple other people ahead of you, everyone's urgent here. Oh, well, okay, ma'am, who's in front of me? Well, we got Mr. Sampson, who has an ouchie on his finger. Then we have Miss Becker, who has her varicose veins needing massaged. And then we got little Johnny over there with a blistering fever of 98.9. But if you could just sit over there, wait patiently, and try not to die. All right, I might have exaggerated for effect here a little bit, but in all honesty, the concept is accurate. This is literally what you're voting for if you take this everything is urgent approach. All right. Well, like I said, I still have like 6 or 8 other points on this topic I want to make, but they're going to have to wait for a future episode. For now, I think I more than clearly outlined why I'm able to confidently make the statement that I think sense of urgency is bullshit. Feel free to reach out to me if you disagree. If there's something I haven't considered, I'm always open for hearing other positions. Send any comments or feedback to comments.nextlevelmanagement@gmail.com. Also, please find Next Level Construction Management with Rob Crum on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter, and give the show a follow. And a reminder, all episodes are now up on YouTube, Rumble, and Spotify. And as I said, I'm trying to get to 20 followers on Rumble in the next week. So if you could take a minute, create an account if you don't have one. It's free. I think it just requires an email address and follow the show. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, if you could, share and repost the videos and reels. This also really helps spread the message and helps the show grow. Thanks. I'll talk to everyone next time. God bless America. And as always, Team GSD, be relentless.
Thank you for listening to the Next Level Construction Management Podcast.